He mentioned the number of people in poverty, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm pleased to say there are 1.7 million fewer people in poverty today.
A staggering 14 million people are now living in poverty in this country. 14 million. 1 million adults can't even afford to eat every day. 9 million are skipping meals and cutting back on food. A record 2.1 million people are now using food banks. 7 million households going without heating. Thousands being hospitalised with malnutrition. And the number of children in food poverty has doubled in the last year. It's actually doubled. This is not a record to be proud of. It's a source of national shame.
He mentioned inequality. Inequality today is lower.
Well, imagine the shock for the Prime Minister, who thinks uncapping bonuses for millionaire bankers whilst imposing crappy real terms pay cuts on public sector workers is a terrific idea, when he finds out in 2022 incomes for the poorest 14 million people fell by 7.5%, whilst incomes for the richest fifth saw a 7.8% increase.
It's also the parties that ensure that there are 200,000 fewer pensioners living in poverty today.
Well, again, imagine the Prime Minister's shock when he finds out the number of pensioners living in relative poverty has actually increased by more than 200,000. Latest figures show that in 2021-22, more than 2 million pensioners were living in poverty in the UK. More than 2 million.
Just today, this government is taking action to reform defective EU laws to unlock over 100,000 homes.
Well, let's take a look at that. This is what Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove said in March 2018. Not only will there be no abandonment of the environmental principles that we've adopted in our time in the EU, but indeed we aim to strengthen environmental protection measures. Just like everything else this government says, it was, of course, complete bollocks.
You guys have had some pause on the development here, thanks.
The Prime Minister watering down regulations for those building homes near rivers in protected areas. Developers will no longer need to prove they can offset the pollution in waterways caused by their new homes to get the green light. As it stands, they're forced to invest in new wetlands and plant tree buffers to stop nutrients seeping into the water.
That's right, the government now plans to rip up water pollution rules by amending the Levelling Up Bill to undo EU rules stopping house builders polluting sensitive areas.
It was a disproportionate and poorly targeted old EU ruling that blocked these homes. Thankfully, we can now reverse that.
It will essentially force planning officials to pretend sewage pollution from new developments doesn't exist when considering applications for sensitive areas like the Norfolk Broads and the Lake District. And let's not forget the UK is already one of the worst countries for water quality in Europe.
Over the last few years, we have delivered an extra 4,000 new prison officers.
Thanks to cuts by the Conservative government, we now have fewer prison officers in England and Wales than we did in 2010.
And because we're boosting prison pay, we're also improving retention.
You've just imposed a crappy real terms pay cut on them.
In England, partly the reason that the waiting lists are not coming down as fast as we would like is because of strike action by doctors.
Just imagine being one of the doctors who sacrificed so much to keep us safe during the pandemic, having to listen to this shameless bollocks.
It's clear it's only the Conservatives that are on the side of the hard-working British public.